Ever wondered how people found love before dating apps? Like, way before. Did they just patiently wait, hoping for a magical connection? Or did they sometimes take matters into their own hands with methods that sound utterly unbelievable today? Would you trust a dream induced by a special kind of fasting? Could a carefully chosen vegetable really point you to your soulmate? Prepare yourself, because the lengths people went to in history to try and escape singleness are truly astonishing, and some of these cures are so strange, you will find it hard to imagine they were once serious business. Number 15. The magic of the yarrow plant. Long before dating profiles and swiping right, people often turned to nature for answers, especially when it came to matters of the heart. One plant that held a special place in love-seeking rituals was yarrow. This common herb, with its feathery leaves and clusters of tiny white or pink flowers, was thought to possess mystical properties that could help a person discover their future beloved. It was not about making someone fall in love with you, but more about divination, a way to peek into the future and see who destiny had in store. The methods involving yarrow were quite specific. One popular belief, particularly in parts of Europe, was that a young woman could use yarrow to dream of her future husband. To do this, she would need to carefully gather the yarrow. Sometimes the instructions specified that it had to be picked from a young man's grave, adding a rather spooky and solemn layer to the ritual. Once obtained, the yarrow was not just casually placed under a pillow. Oh no, there was often a little rhyme or incantation to be recited while handling the herb. Imagine a young woman, perhaps a bit nervous, carefully sewing a small sprig of yarrow into a piece of flannel. As she did this, she might whisper a traditional verse, something along the lines of, "Thou pretty herb of Venus's tree, thy true name it is yarrow. Now who my future husband may be, pray tell thou me tomorrow." The act of sewing it, the soft texture of the flannel, the scent of the yarrow, all would have contributed to the sense of performing a special magical act. After preparing the yarrow charm, she would place it under her pillow before going to sleep. The belief was strong. If she had performed the ritual correctly, her future husband would appear to her in her dreams that very night. It was a night filled with anticipation, a hope that the yarrow would unlock the secrets of her romantic future. The simplicity of the plant contrasted sharply with the profound hope placed upon its supposed powers. This reliance on a common wildflower shows how deeply intertwined everyday life and belief in subtle magics were in many historical communities. The yarrow was more than just a plant. It was a key, a messenger from the realm of destiny. Number 14. Walking backwards with a mirror at Halloween. Halloween, or All Hallows' Eve, has long been considered a time when the veil between this world and the next is at its thinnest. This made it a prime occasion for all sorts of divination, especially for young people eager to know who they would marry. One particularly widespread and rather eerie custom involved a mirror and a very specific backward walk. This was not for the faint of heart, as it was believed that you might see more than just your future spouse. The ritual required a brave individual, usually a young woman, to take a mirror and walk backwards, often down a flight of stairs or out into the darkness of a garden or field. Sometimes, they also had to eat an apple while doing this, or hold a candle. The key was the backward movement and the gaze fixed upon the mirror. It was said that, as she performed this tricky maneuver, the face of her future husband would appear in the mirror, looking over her shoulder. You can just imagine the scene. A shadowy night, the chill of late October in the air, the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows, and the intense focus on the reflective surface, hoping to see a beloved face materialize. The tension must have been immense. Every creak of the stairs, Every rustle of leaves, every shadow could be misinterpreted or heighten the fear. And there was a more sinister possibility whispered about too. If, instead of a future spouse, the reflection showed a skull or a coffin, it was taken as a grim omen that the person would not live long enough to marry at all. This added a layer of genuine risk and trepidation to the seemingly simple act of looking into a mirror. It was not just a playful game. For many, it was a serious attempt to divine a future that held immense personal significance. The mirror, an object of everyday use, transformed on this magical night into a portal, a scrying glass that could reveal life's most hoped for or most feared outcomes. The darkness, the backward motion, and the concentrated gaze were all designed to open the seer to supernatural influences, making Halloween a night of high stakes for hopeful singles. Number 13. The power of the dumb cake. Across parts of Britain, a peculiar ritual known as baking a dumb cake was a popular method for young women to discover their future husbands. The name itself gives a clue to one of its most crucial elements. The entire process had to be carried out in complete silence. Not a single word could be uttered by those involved, from mixing the ingredients to the final anxious moments of waiting. This silence was believed to be essential for the magic to work, creating an atmosphere of solemnity and heightened senses. The recipe and the ritual for the dumb cake varied by region, but some common threads ran through most versions. It was often a task for a group of unmarried young women working together in this silent pact. The ingredients were simple, usually flour, water, salt, and sometimes soot or other unusual additions to mark it as no ordinary bake. Each girl would take her turn participating in the mixing, kneading, and shaping of the small, flat cakes or single-shared cake. Every action had to be precise, and often the instructions included unusual details, like mixing the dough with the left thumb only, or pricking their initials onto their portion of the cake with a pin. Once the cake was prepared, it was baked over a fire. As the cake cooked, the girls would wait still in silence in a dimly lit room. Critical moment was when the cake was ready. It was believed that at midnight, as the clock struck 12, the apparition of the future husband of one or all of the girls would enter the room and either point to his intended's initials on the cake, lay a hand on her portion, or make some other gesture to indicate his choice. Imagine the scene. A group of young women huddled together in the dark, hearts pounding, listening for the slightest sound, every shadow a potential harbinger of their future. The air would be thick with anticipation, and perhaps a little fear. Any unexpected noise or interruption could break the spell. The dumb cake ritual was a test of patience, cooperation, and nerve, a silent, shared hope for a glimpse into what the future held in store for their love lives. The very act of clambetra, silent creation under the cloak of night, made it a powerful bonding experience, regardless of whether a spectral suitor actually appeared. Number 12. Sowing hemp seed for a spectral reaper. Another popular divination ritual, especially prevalent on Halloween or other spiritually charged nights, involved the sowing of hemp seed. This practice was not about cultivating a crop for practical use, but rather about conjuring an image of one's future spouse through a symbolic act of planting and reaping. It was a solitary ritual, often carried out by a young woman, and it required a good deal of courage as it typically took place outdoors, in the dark. The ritual would begin with the woman going out alone, usually at midnight, to a garden, a field, or even a churchyard. She would carry a handful of hemp seed. As she walked, she would scatter the seed behind her over her shoulder, while reciting a specific incantation. A common version of this rhyme went something like, "Hemp seed I sow, and he that is my true love, come after me and mow." The act of sowing was symbolic of her desire to cultivate a relationship, to plant the seeds of future love. After scattering all the seed, The critical part of the ritual was to look back over her shoulder. If the magic was working, she was supposed to see an apparition of her future husband. He would not just be standing there. He would be engaged in the symbolic act of mowing the hemp she had just sown, reaping the harvest of her magical efforts with a scythe. This image of a spectral figure performing a farm task in the dead of night must have been quite unsettling, even if it was the desired outcome. The scythe, an instrument of harvest, but also often associated with death or father time, added an extra layer of eerie symbolism to the vision. The success of the ritual depended on her bravery to perform it alone in a potentially frightening place, her faith in the words she chanted, and her ability to perceive the ghostly figure. For those who undertook it, sowing hemp seed was a direct and active appeal to the supernatural forces believed to govern love and marriage. A bold step into the unknown in search of a promised future. Number 11. The telltale apple peel. Apples have long been associated with love, temptation, and divination, from ancient myths to folk traditions. One of the simplest yet most enduring methods of love divination involving an apple was the practice of peeling an apple in one continuous strip and then using the peel to discover the initial of one's future beloved. This was a common custom in many parts of Europe and North America, often practiced by young people at social gatherings, especially around autumn, when apples were plentiful. The ritual was straightforward. A person, typically a young woman, would take a whole apple and carefully pare it, trying to keep the peel in one single unbroken length. This required a steady hand and a bit of skill, as breaking the peel was sometimes thought to break the spell or indicate bad luck in love. Once the long strip of peel was successfully removed, the next step was to throw it over her shoulder. The way the peel landed on the floor was key. It was believed that the shape the apple peel formed would resemble a letter of the alphabet, and this letter would be the first initial of her future husband's name. Imagine a group of friends, giggling and excited, each taking turns to peel their apple. Concentration on their faces as they tried to keep the peel intact. The playful anticipation as they swung the peel over their shoulder, and then the collective rush to interpret the shape it made on the ground. Was it N for Samuel? Or perhaps a J for John? Sometimes, if the shape was ambiguous, there would be lively debates and interpretations. This practice was less about solemn magic and more about a light-hearted social form of fortune-telling. Yet, beneath the fun, there was a genuine curiosity and hope. The apple, a symbol of fruitfulness and knowledge, was transformed into a simple tool for glimpsing the romantic future. It was accessible, required no special ingredients beyond a common fruit, and could be done almost anywhere, making it a widespread and beloved way for hopeful singles to seek a clue about who they might one day marry. The simplicity of the act belied the weight of the question it sought to answer. Number 10. Bay leaves for dreamy revelations. Bay leaves, those aromatic leaves often used in cooking, also held a place in the historical quest for love, particularly in the realm of dream divination. Similar to yarrow, bay leaves were believed to have the power to induce dreams that would reveal a future spouse. This practice was common in various European traditions and was often performed on specific nights thought to be potent for such magic like St. Valentine's Eve or Halloween. The ritual itself was relatively simple, but required adherence to specific details. A young unmarried woman would take a certain number of bay leaves, often 3, 5, or 7 numbers frequently associated with magic. She would then pin these leaves to her pillow, or sometimes place them directly under it before she went to sleep. In some traditions, she might also have to perform other small actions, such as fasting for a period beforehand, or maintaining silence as she prepared for bed. The key was the intention and the belief that the bay leaves possessed a special virtue that could influence her dreams. As she lay down to sleep, with the faint, spicy scent of bay leaves, perhaps perfuming the air around her, her mind would be focused on the hope of seeing her future beloved. If all was done correctly, her dreams that night were expected to feature the man she was destined to marry. He might appear clearly, or perhaps the dream would be more symbolic, offering clues that she would then have to interpret. Imagine the anticipation leading up to such a night, carefully selecting the leaves, the quiet ritual of pinning them, and then the eager wait for sleep to come and hopefully bring the wished-for vision. Power attributed to such a common household herb highlights how deeply intertwined everyday items were with belief in subtle magical influences. For those seeking love, the humble bay leaf was not just a seasoning. It was a potential gateway to understanding their romantic destiny, a fragrant key to unlocking the secrets held within their own subconscious, guided by the plant's mystical properties. Number 9. The candle and walnut shellboat race. In some cultures, particularly in parts of Central and Eastern Europe, a charming and somewhat competitive form of love divination involved candles and walnut shells. This was often a group activity practiced by young, unmarried women, usually around festive times of the year like Christmas or New Year's Eve, when thoughts often turned to the future. It was a way to symbolically see whose romantic wishes might come true first, or even who their partner might be. The preparation was quite delightful. Each participant would take half a walnut shell, which would serve as a tiny boat. Into this shell, they would fix a small candle, perhaps a birthday-sized one, or a specially made tiny taper. Sometimes, each girl would mark her walnut shell boat in some way or use a different colored candle so she could identify her own. Once everyone had their little vessel ready, a large bowl or tub of water was prepared. This basin of water represented the sea of life or the flow of destiny. Then, all at once, or one by one, the girls would light their tiny candles and carefully float their walnut shell boats on the surface of the water. What happened next was a matter of intense observation and interpretation. If a boat sailed smoothly and its candle burned brightly, it was a good omen for the owner's love life. If two boats drifted towards each other and touched, it was sometimes interpreted that those two individuals, if names or symbols were associated with the boats, were destined to be together. Or if all boats represented seekers, that their owners would find love around the same time. If a candle extinguished quickly or a boat capsized, it might be seen as a sign of disappointment or delay in finding a partner. The gentle movement of the water, the flickering candlelight reflected on its surface, and the miniature flotilla of hopeful boats created a mesmerizing spectacle. It was a playful yet earnest way to seek answers, turning a simple set of materials into a dynamic oracle for their romantic futures, where the elements of fire and water played a crucial role in revealing fate's intentions. Number 8. Staring into a well at midnight. Wells. As sources of life giving water and deep mysterious openings into the earth, have long been regarded as places with a special connection to the spiritual or supernatural world. It is no surprise, then, that they featured in various forms of divination, including those aimed at revealing a future spouse. One such practice involved a rather brave act, going to a well at midnight and gazing intently into its dark depths. This ritual, found in folklore across many regions, required the seeker, usually a young woman, to approach the well alone, under the cover of darkness, typically on a night considered auspicious for such activities. Like Midsummer's Eve or Halloween, solitude and the late hour would already create an atmosphere of heightened sensitivity and perhaps a little fear. Once at the well, she would have to peer down into the water. Some versions of the ritual suggested she should also hold a mirror angled to reflect the water's surface, or drop a stone into the well and make a wish, or ask a question as it fell. The belief was that if she stared long enough and with enough concentration, an image would form on the surface of the water or in her mind's eye, the face of her future husband. The dark, reflective surface of the well water acted like a natural scrying mirror. Imagine the scene, the stillness of the night, perhaps the moon casting an eerie glow, the cold dampness rising from the well, and the intense focus on the inky blackness below. Any ripple on the water, any trick of the light could be interpreted as a sign. Of course, there was also the inherent danger of being near an open well in the dark. This ritual was not just a casual glance. It was an act of courage and deep belief, a journey to the edge of the known world to seek a glimpse of a profoundly desired future. The well was a portal, and the water within a liquid crystal ball, offering answers from the depths to those daring enough to look. Number 7. The curious case of snails and slates. In the annals of truly unusual love, divination methods, the use of snails surely ranks high. This practice, which sounds rather slimy and unconventional to modern ears, was found in parts of Britain and involved enlisting a common garden snail to trace the initial of a future beloved. It was often performed on specific eves, such as May Eve or All Hallows Eve, when magical energies were thought to be particularly strong. The ritual began with finding a suitable snail. The seeker, typically a young woman, would then prepare a surface for the snail to traverse. This could be a clean hearthstone, a slate, or sometimes a plate lightly dusted with flour or fine ash to make the snail's trail more visible. The snail would then be carefully placed onto this surface. The crucial part was what happened next. The snail, in its slow meandering journey, would leave behind a silvery trail. The hopeful individual would watch this trail with bated breath, believing that the pattern formed by the snail's slime would eventually shape itself into a letter of the alphabet. This letter, much like the apple peel initial, was supposed to be the first initial of her future husband's name. Imagine the patience required, watching a snail make its way across a surface, trying to discern a meaningful letter from its random-seeming path. The room would need to be still, so as not to disturb the tiny oracle. There was a certain charm to the idea of such a humble creature being a purveyor of romantic destiny. It speaks to a worldview where magic and meaning could be found in the most unexpected corners of the natural world. The snail, usually just a garden pest or a slow-moving inhabitant of damp places, was elevated to the role of a fortune teller. The act of waiting, of closely observing, and of interpreting the slimy calligraphy of a snail turned a simple, natural process into a focused ritual of hope and anticipation for love. It was a quiet, personal, and distinctly earthy way of seeking answers from the universe. Number 6. Sleeping with wedding cake under the pillow. This is a tradition that has surprisingly lingered in various forms, even into more recent times, though its origins are rooted in older beliefs about sympathetic magic. The idea was that by placing a piece of wedding cake under your pillow, you would dream of your future spouse. It was a specific kind of magic, relying on the notion that an object associated with a successful union, a wedding, could help bring about a similar outcome for the dreamer. Practice was fairly straightforward. An unmarried person, usually a guest at a wedding, would obtain a small piece of the wedding cake. It was important that this was cake from an actual wedding ceremony. They would then take this piece of cake home. Some traditions specified that the cake should be passed through the bride's wedding ring before being taken, adding an extra layer of symbolic potency. That night, before going to sleep, the person would place the piece of cake under their pillow. Often it would be wrapped in paper or cloth to avoid a crumbly, sticky mess, though the image of literally sleeping on a piece of cake is quite amusing. As they drifted off to sleep, the hope was that the cake's essence, its connection to marriage and happiness, would influence their dreams, causing their future husband or wife to appear to them. It was a gentle, hopeful form of divination, less about active spell casting and more about inviting a prophetic dream. The sweetness of the cake was perhaps symbolically linked to the sweetness of future love. This custom highlights how deeply weddings themselves were seen as powerful, almost magical events, capable of radiating good fortune. For a single person attending a wedding, securing that small slice of cake was not just about enjoying a treat. It was an opportunity to tap into the celebratory and auspicious energy of the occasion to get a glimpse into their own romantic future. The pillow became a kind of altar, and the cake a sacred offering in the quest for love. Number 5. The twisting fortunes of a wet shirt. This particular method of love divination is quite dramatic and involves a bit of an ordeal typically performed on Halloween or a similar night of heightened spiritual activity. It centers around washing an article of clothing, usually a shirt or a chemise, and then waiting for a spectral visitor. This was a ritual that required patience, a certain amount of nerve, and a belief in the appearance of spirits. A young woman wishing to know her future husband would take a piece of her underclothing, often her chemise, and wash it in a stream or a tub of water. After washing it, she would not wring it out completely, but leave it somewhat damp. Then, she would hang it up to dry before a fire, usually in a darkened room, and always alone. She then had to sit and watch the garment, often in complete silence, as it slowly dried in the heat of the fire. The belief was that, as the garment neared being dry, usually around the stroke of midnight, the apparition of her future husband would manifest. He would enter the room and perform the symbolic act of turning the shirt or chemise as if to help it dry evenly. This vision was the sign she was waiting for. Imagine the scene. A solitary figure in a dimly lit room, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and perhaps the dripping of water from the damp garment. The tension would build as the hours passed and midnight approached. Every shadow, every flicker of the flames could be a precursor to the appearance. This ritual was a test of endurance and faith, turning a mundane chore like laundry into a profound magical act. The shirt, an intimate item of clothing, became the focal point for conjuring a vision, and the act of it being turned by an unseen hand was the confirmation that her future partner had been revealed, at least in spirit form. It was a very personal and somewhat eerie vigil, kept in the hope of love. Number 4. Counting barn rafters or church pews. Sometimes, the methods for divining a future spouse were woven into everyday actions or specific slightly unusual tasks that involved counting. These practices often had a rhythmic, almost meditative quality, and relied on the belief that performing a specific repetitive action would unlock a piece of hidden knowledge. Counting the rafters in a barn or the pews in a church were two such examples, each with its own particular set of rules. For the barn rafter divination, a young person might be instructed to go into a barn and, while walking backwards or performing some other specific movement, count the rafters overhead. The number they landed on, or a name associated with a number through some predetermined code, was supposed to reveal something about their future partner. This might seem simple, but doing it correctly, perhaps while maintaining silence or avoiding looking in a certain direction, added to the ritualistic nature of the act. The barn, a place of harvest and storage, might have been seen as symbolic of future abundance, including in love. Similarly, counting church pews was another method. A person might have to enter a church at a specific time, perhaps when it was empty, and count the pews in a particular order or manner. Again, the final number or a subsequent interpretation based on that number would offer a clue. Sometimes it was believed that the future spouse would be seen sitting in one of the pews during this ritual, or that their name might be found written or carved somewhere. The church, as a sacred space, lent an air of solemnity and divine sanction to this form of fortune-telling. These counting rituals, whether in the rustic setting of a barn or the hallowed space of a church, transformed ordinary architectural elements into tools for divination. They required focus and adherence to often arbitrary seeming rules, turning a simple act of enumeration into a quest for one of life's most sought-after answers. The repetition and concentration involved could also induce a state of mind more receptive to intuitive insights or perceived omens. Number 3. The prophetic powers of onions or potatoes. Vegetables from the pantry were not exempt from being used in the intricate world of love divination. Commonplace items like onions or potatoes were sometimes employed in rather specific ways to determine who one might marry, or even how many suitors one might have. These methods often involved writing names on the vegetables or observing their growth patterns. One popular custom with onions involved a young woman taking several onions on a significant night, such as New Year's Eve or St. Thomas's Eve. She would then inscribe the names of various potential suitors, or simply names she liked, each on a different onion. These named onions were then placed in a warm spot, perhaps near the hearth or on a windowsill, and left for a period. The onion that sprouted first was believed to indicate the man she would marry. Imagine carefully writing names on the papery skin of onions, then placing them with care and checking them each day for the first signs of green shoots. It was a slow, patient form of divination, where the life force within the humble onion was seen as a decider of fate. Potatoes could be used in similar ways, or sometimes in slightly different divinatory practices. For example, a potato might be peeled and stuck with pins, each pin representing a potential suitor, or like the apple peel, a long potato peel thrown over the shoulder could be interpreted. In some traditions, a young woman might put a potato in her pocket when she went to bed, hoping to dream of her future love. These practices show how everyday foodstuffs were imbued with symbolic meaning. The growth of an onion shoot, the random shape of a peel, these were not seen as mere chance occurrences, but as messages from a hidden realm guided by unseen forces to reveal romantic destiny. It was a way of finding the magical in the mundane, turning the contents of the larder into oracles for the heart. Kitchen, a place of daily sustenance, could also become a laboratory for love magic. Number 2. St. Agnes Eve, rituals for a vision of love. St. Agnes Eve, the night of January 20th, leading into the feast day of St. Agnes, a young Roman martyr and patron saint of virgins, was historically one of the most significant dates in the calendar for love divination, particularly for young women. The belief was incredibly strong that if a girl performed specific rituals on this night, she would be granted a vision of her future husband in her dreams. These rituals were often quite demanding, requiring fasting, silence, and precise actions. One of the core components of many St. Agnes Eve rituals was fasting. The young woman would have to abstain from all food and drink for the entire day. This act of self-denial was thought to purify the body and mind, making her more receptive to spiritual visions. Absolute silence was often another strict requirement. She was not to speak a word from sunset until sunrise the next morning. Any spoken word could break the spell. As bedtime approached, there were further specific preparations. She might have to prepare a special, often symbolic meal, known as a dumb cake. Though distinct from the group ritual, this was often a solitary version made for herself, eating a portion of it before bed. The way she went to bed was also critical. Often she was instructed to walk backward to her bedchamber, undress, and get into bed, all while maintaining her silence and avoiding looking behind her or even to the side. Once in bed, she was to lie flat on her back, sometimes with her hands placed behind her head or with specific herbs like rosemary and thyme pinned to her nightclothes. If all these demanding conditions were met, Saint Agnes was supposed to favor her with a dream in which her future husband would appear, perhaps offering her a drink or a kiss, or simply showing his face. Poet John Keats famously captured the mystique and romance of these traditions in his poem The Eve of Saint Agnes. For hopeful singles, this night was a profound opportunity, a challenging vigil that promised the ultimate reward, a true vision of their destined love sanctioned by a saint. Combination of physical privation, silent contemplation, and meticulous ritual created an atmosphere thick with magical expectation. Number 1. The 9 peas in a pod divination. One of the most charming and widespread folk methods for divining something about a future husband involved a simple pea pod. This practice, found in various forms across Britain and other parts of Europe, was particularly popular among young women and was often done in a spirit of playful hopefulness, especially during the pea season in late spring or early summer. Key to this divination was finding a pea pod that contained exactly 9 peas. The ritual began with the search for this special pod. When shelling peas, if a young woman happened upon a pod containing precisely 9 peas, it was considered a lucky find and an opportunity for divination. She would then take this pod with its 9 peas still inside and hang it above the main doorway of her house. The belief was that the very next eligible unmarried man who walked under the pea pod and through that doorway would either be her future husband or, in some versions of the tradition, would bear the same first name as her future husband. Imagine the quiet excitement of finding that perfect 9 pea pod. Careful act of hanging it above the door, perhaps, with a hidden string, so it was not too obvious. Then, the anticipation would begin. Every time the door opened, every footstep approaching would bring a flutter of hope or curiosity. Who would be the next to enter? Would it be someone known, a handsome stranger, or perhaps just the neighbor's boy? The simplicity of the ritual, using an everyday vegetable, made it accessible to everyone. The number 9 often held mystical significance in folklore, and its appearance in the pea pod was the trigger for this particular piece of love magic. It was a gentle, passive form of divination, relying on chance and the ordinary comings and goings of daily life to reveal a secret of the heart. For those who practiced it, that humble pea pod hanging over the door was a symbol of hope, a quiet signal sent out to the universe in the quest for a future partner.